There's a person who always smiles, who always agrees, who says yes even when everything inside them is screaming no. You've met them. Maybe you are them. The one who gives more than they have, apologizes even when they haven't done anything wrong, and disappears just to make sure someone else feels seen. But beneath that gentle surface lies a quiet tragedy, a deep-rooted psychological wound dressed as kindness, a child that never got permission to be real. This is the psychology of a people pleaser, and to understand it, we must begin not with a definition, but with a moment. Let's imagine a little boy. He lives in a home where love is conditional, where approval is handed out like candy, but taken away the moment he cries too loud, acts too bold, or questions too much. He learns that being himself leads to rejection, while being agreeable leads to peace. He begins to contort, smiling when he's hurt, helping when he's exhausted, laughing when he wants to scream. Over time, he stops asking, "What do I want?" and starts asking, "What do they need from me?" because that question kept him safe. Now fast forward 20 years, that boy is a man or a woman. They work hard, keep friends close, always respond, always care. But something feels wrong. Their life is full of yes but empty of fulfillment. They're tired, unseen, invisible, even to themselves. This is what people rarely understand. A people pleaser isn't trying to manipulate anyone. They're trying to survive a world that once taught them being authentic meant being alone. The psychology goes deeper. At the heart of people pleasing is for response, a lesser-known trauma reaction. Most of us know fight or flight, but there's also freeze. And then 4 is the nervous system saying, "I will make myself useful, agreeable, and invisible if it means you won't hurt me." It's an adaptive strategy built in childhood, a response to environments where confrontation meant danger, where love was earned and not given. So they learn to become mirrors. They reflect what others want to see. They become emotional chameleons, adapting, adjusting, disappearing. But here's the cost. They lose themselves in the process. And yet in modern society, this behavior is often celebrated. We call them kind, empathetic, such a good person. But we don't see the pain. We don't see the anxiety behind every text message, the exhaustion from constantly monitoring other people's feelings, the guilt when they finally say no, and worst of all, we don't see the quiet, creeping resentment that builds in the shadows of their endless self-sacrifice. Because here's the secret. People pleasers don't want to please. They want to be loved. They want to feel safe. But love, when built on self-erasure, isn't love at all. It's a performance, a prison made of politeness. Let's pause here and ask the most important question. Where does it all begin? In almost every case, people-pleasing starts in childhood, not necessarily from abuse, though that happens too, but often from subtle emotional neglect, homes where emotions were inconvenient, where boundaries were not respected, where children became the emotional regulators of their parents, a mother who only smiled when her child behaved a certain way, a father who praised obedience but punished honesty. In these quiet moments, the child learns, my needs are a problem, my anger is dangerous, my sadness is a burden. So they begin to disown parts of themselves, and instead they become who the world needs them to be. They become helpful, pleasant, easy, and in return, they feel accepted. But it's not acceptance of them, it's acceptance of the mask. As adults, they enter relationships that mirror their childhood. They attract takers, people who love the convenience of their compliance, people who say, "You're such a great listener," but never ask how they're doing, people who say, "You're so easy to be around," but never notice their sadness. And so the cycle continues. They give and give until the well runs dry, until they wake up one day feeling like a stranger in their own life. No identity, no boundaries, no voice, just a long list of things they did for other people. But here's where it gets even more tragic. People pleasers often feel deep shame about their own needs. Asking for help feels like a crime. Saying no feels like betrayal. Having preferences feels selfish because for years they were trained to believe that love was a transaction. That value comes from what they offer, not who they are. So even when they're exhausted, they smile. Even when they're overwhelmed, they agree. Even when they're breaking inside, they pretend they're fine. It's not just fear, it's identity. But what happens when that identity starts to crack? What happens when the exhaustion becomes too much? When the resentment breaks the surface? When the suppressed voice inside them finally whispers, "I want to be real"? That's the beginning of transformation, the first breath of liberation. Because healing from people-pleasing isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming honest. It's about reclaiming your voice, your needs, your anger, your joy. It's about standing in front of a mirror and saying, "I matter too." People pleasers are not weak. they're some of the strongest people you'll ever meet, because it takes enormous strength to carry the weight of everyone else's comfort, to silence your truth every day and still keep going. But that strength doesn't have to be used for survival anymore. It can be used for rebirth. Healing begins quietly, not with grand gestures, not with cutting everyone off or suddenly turning defiant, but with small defiant truths whispered in the dark. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. I feel unseen. These are not selfish thoughts. They are the first seeds of awakening. And for the people pleaser, they're terrifying because their entire identity was built on silence, but you cannot heal what you pretend doesn't hurt. The journey begins with one realization. You are allowed to exist outside of someone else's expectations. Let that sink in. You are allowed to disappoint people, to be misunderstood, to be disliked if it means being real, because people-pleasing is at its core a form of self-abandonment, and healing is the act of returning, coming home to yourself. Not the self you curated for others, but the self that feels, that dreams, that gets angry, that says no without guilt, that says yes with intention. This transformation doesn't happen all at once. For the people pleaser, even setting one boundary can feel like emotional surgery. Saying I can't make it tonight feels like betrayal. Not responding to a text immediately triggers anxiety. Saying I need space feels like they're asking for war. But that fear isn't truth. It's history. It's a nervous system still wired for survival, still afraid that any deviation from approval means abandonment. And here's the hard part. Sometimes people will be upset. Sometimes those who benefited from your silence will resist your voice. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because they were never loving the real you in the first place. Let that be your compass. Any love that requires your compliance is not love, it's control. So, what does real healing look like? And it's messy, it's emotional, it's full of grief, because when a people pleaser starts healing, they begin mourning the years they lost to performance. They grieve the friendships that were one-sided, the relationships built on pleasing, the job roles where their worth was measured only by how much they sacrificed. But in that grief is gold, because it makes space for something new, the authentic self. Let's speak to them directly. To the people pleaser watching this, you were never weak. You were never fake. You were surviving. You became what the world demanded because your younger self didn't know another way. But now you do. You're allowed to be soft and strong, kind but firm, empathetic yet boundaried, loving without abandoning yourself. You don't need to be harsh to be honest. You don't need to become cruel to protect your heart. You just need to remember this. You are not responsible for anyone else's emotions. Say it again. You are not responsible for anyone else's emotions. Not your partner's moods. Not your parents' validation. Not your friends' insecurities. You can support love and care, but not at the cost of your own voice. This is the great shift from performing connection to experiencing connection. From being liked for who you're not to being loved for who you are. When people pleasers start setting boundaries, they often worry, but what if I end up alone? Here's the truth. You might lose some people, but you will also find people. The ones who see you, not your service. The ones who listen, not just speak. The ones who don't just take your light, but reflect it back to you. This is the paradox. People pleasers fear rejection, but only by risking rejection can they finally feel belonging. Let's go deeper into the psychology. Why is people pleasing so persistent? Because at a cognitive level, it's linked to identity fusion. They don't just act in service of others. They believe that's who they are. And to let go of that identity feels like death. But it's not death. It's rebirth. It's the painful but beautiful process of becoming whole. Not a fragment of someone else's comfort, but a sovereign human being. A person with opinions, preferences, desires. A person with the right to change their mind, to rest, to say no, to take up space. You were not born to be an accessory to someone else's life. And what about guilt? Ah, yes. The guilt is like a ghost that haunts every people pleaser. They feel it after declining an invitation, after turning off their phone, after asserting their truth. But guilt isn't always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's just old programming reacting to new behavior. It's the echo of childhood saying, don't upset them, don't speak up, don't be selfish. The healing response is this. Feel the guilt and do it anyway. Let the nervous system recalibrate. Let your inner child learn that safety no longer comes from self-sacrifice, it comes from self-honoring. And let's talk about self-love, not in the shallow, trendy way, but in the real, gritty way. Self-love for a people pleaser looks like this: saying no without a paragraph of apology, resting without earning it, walking away from relationships that only love your silence, Asking yourself, what do I want? Before answering, what do they need? Choosing discomfort now over resentment later. This kind of love isn't soft. It's revolutionary. It's the rebellion of someone who has spent years being a mirror and is finally becoming a masterpiece. So where do you go from here? You start small. You name your needs. You notice the patterns. You practice saying no. You disappoint people and survive it. You will shake. You will doubt. You will cry. But you will also feel something new. Freedom, peace, clarity. Because for the first time you're not acting, you're living. You are not a product of what others need. You are a person full and flawed and worthy. Let's end with this. The world does not need more agreeable people. It needs more authentic ones. The world does not need you to shrink to keep others comfortable. It needs you to expand, even if it rattles a few cages. And you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be loved by everyone. You just need to be loved by yourself. And a few real ones who love the unedited version of you. That is enough. That has always been enough. So to the recovering people pleaser, take up space. Take back your life. You don't owe anyone your silence. You never did.